Welcome everyone to this session, the last session of the day of the 2020 virtual fall workshop. I'm R.G. Absher, the committee chair for the National Trails Workshop, and will be moderating the session and help moderate the session today. Just a couple housekeeping items. Please note that the chats directed to a specific person will not be seen by everyone. All entries in the chat are public and that they will be part of the chat record for this session. We will have people monitoring the chat for the questions and troubleshooting. The recent passage of the Great American Outdoors Act presents an unprecedented opportunity for the National Trails System. A special task force of the partnership of the National Trails System recently outlined a multi-year action plan to protect sites and segments along the 30 national scenic and national historic trails. This workshop will engage participants in a discussion of key aspects of the action plan. I'm pleased to introduce Ron Tipton, the former president and CEO of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, PNTS board member and member of the task force, who will provide an overview of the action plan concept and lead a group discussion to gain your feedback and input on it as the partnership begins to determine how we will turn this ambitious endeavor into action. Ron?
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me now?
We can, Ron. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hi, this is Ron Tipton. I've been involved in a lot of Zoom events lately with political candidates on the screen. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background, but I'm going to try not to sound like I'm trying to raise money for my political campaign. I've been involved with national trails through my affinity for the Appalachian Trail since the 1970s. And in fact, I actually thru hiked the trail in 1978. My career has been focused on land conservation, outdoor recreation, and particularly national parks, wilderness, and national trails. People talk about having a dream job. Well, I actually wound up in my dream job as my last job, which was being the president CEO of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And I felt more than fortunate to be in that position. I'm really glad to follow the dynamic presentation we had this afternoon, just before this one, on the Great American Outdoors Act, which really was a stunning achievement given this the political environment we're working in today. What I'm going to do is talk about the National Trails campaign that we've put together within the partnership over the last year and a half, and how it connects with the Great American Outdoors legislation, and particularly the opportunity to have full funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Let me explain how we're going to use this next 45 minutes. I am going to give a slide deck presentation that sort of frames the National Trails campaign and talks a little bit about the National Trail System, much of which many of you are familiar with. But I want you to kind of see it as I saw it coming from maybe the outside. And so talk about that. And then I'll tee up several issues that I would like us to have a discussion about. This will be, hopefully more than a question and answer, but maybe a real discussion as to how the partners of the partnership, the partners, members, our staff, our volunteers, how do we work together to fulfill our dream of having fully protected and sustainably managed national historic and scenic trails. So with that, let me dive right into the slide deck. I think you all know what the partnership stands for, which I think is a great agenda. I always talk about the partnership as being this small organization with just an enormous agenda. So the National Trail System, it was founded 52 years ago. What's interesting to me when I took a fresh look at the partnership was I came to the partnership in 2019 and said, I'd like to put together with some help from a team of people that I can work with, a National Trails campaign. And so I started to really do that deep dive into, well, what is this system? Well, first of all, it's huge. I mean, look at, 60,000 miles ultimately when we build it all out. Passes through, all those national parks, national wildlife refuges, wilderness areas. And everybody lives, well, 3/4 of the country lives within an hour's drive of a national trail. And there's a national trail segment in every state in the country. So there's your map, the unforgettable map of these 30 national scenic and historic trails. The first thing that hit me when I started looking at the national trail system as a whole was, we have this incredible system of places, of sites and segments, places to hike, places to drive, places to enjoy the history of America, to relive the American experience, and yet we don't market it as a country that way. I mean, if you look at the rest of the world, what do people in the world think are the places they want to go to hike? I mean, as looking at an entire country, New Zealand, Switzerland, Great Britain, Germany, perhaps, Italy. That we have the most extensive and most impressive system in the world. And just sort of tuck that idea away, because we'll come back to that. Because I think it's one of the things that makes it most possible for us to have a really successful National Trails campaign. So we're focusing, this is what the partnership has achieved to date. And this is impressive. This is over the last 25 or so years. I mean, a significant amount of money for operating funds from the trails, now up to $28 million annually, $90 million in total, and that have protected national trail segments. The challenge cost share projects. We have full-time administrators. And by the way, we have 3 new administrators. I think they're all first rate, and they're going to be an important partners in this National Trails campaign. And then as we just discussed earlier this afternoon with Kathy's and Tyler's and everyone's and Amy's presentation, we now have what we've dreamed about for a long, long time, $900 million a year from the Land and Water Fund, and a huge amount of money that will include trail maintenance. And by the way, I was so gratified to see the Great American Outdoors Act passed, because I was one of a few people in 1996 that put together the original Land and Water Fund Coalition. Only took 24 years to reach our goal. So here's a few, a few images of a series of national trails. Not all 30, but these are some that I selected from the archives. It really struck me how unique and different and how extensive this system is. And so there you've got the Old Oregon Trail, you've got the Arizona National Scenic Trail, most of which is protected on federal land, but still some areas that are left that need to be also protected. The Lewis and Clark Trail, which of the historic trails has the most federal money, the most National Park Service support, and probably is one of the most recognized of the National Historic Trails. And one thing I've thought about with the 19 National Historic Trails is how many people, other than those of us directly involved, could name 10 of those 19 trails. Not very many people. And so we're going to change that. The Juan Bautista de Anza, which is goes all the way to San Francisco. I had no idea that this trail ended in San Francisco, and it just to me shows the real potential for public interest, support, and involvement and use of these trails. That they go from remote parts of the country to major cities. I mean, the old Spanish Trail, it ends in Los Angeles. It begins in Santa Fe, and it has, this. It was a trail about commerce, and I was an American Studies major, and we always talked about the American experience. And when I was in college, Well, nothing presents the American experience more vividly, in my view, than the National Historic Trails. The Continental Divide Trail, just to show that we do have growing family programs to actually help manage and maintain these trails. Pony Express, had a very brief, lifespan just in the 1860s, and yet, as I grew up, I kept hearing about the Pony Express, a very unique experience in America. And of course, we've done a little educating ourselves about the Over Mountain Victory in the last several days. I've actually spent parts of the last 2 summers before this one on sections of the Ice Age Trail. I think it's a great example of what I might call a scenic trail on the move, and that is transitioning from having over about 60% of it protected to moving towards having the entire trail protected in some kind of public or private conservation ownership. In the Alakahakai, I didn't have any idea this trail existed, and yet it's had some of the greatest land acquisition successes in recent years. I mean, think about the diversity of these trails. And by the way, I'll come back to that, and hopefully our discussion will also touch on the need to think about the JEDI principles, the diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice, and how our trail system partially reflects that now, but not nearly to the extent it should. And then last, but probably not least, my personal favorite. This is, as I was telling RG, because the Over Mountain Victory Trail crosses the AT very near here. This is the Roan Highlands, just north of Roan Mountain. I do believe, people say I'd like to spend one day on the Appalachian Trail. This is the day I would spend crossing the Roan Highlands. So when you think about, the National Trails campaign, it really caused us to start to step back and say, well, how do we sell this system? Because it's great to talk about hiking and about, touring for history and so on, but that doesn't capture all the value of this trail system that we have right now, and we will have even more when we are able to, expand the protection of these precious trails. But economic value. Look at the block on your right there, $887 billion contribution to the U.S. economy. We've known that, but we've now starting to quantify that. Protecting landscapes, not just trails, but landscapes. Capturing unique American stories and sites and places and experiences. Let's underscore this, historically underrepresented people. Now, we do have the Trail of Tears, and we do have the Selma to Montgomery Trail. One of the things that, as we review new national trail proposals, as well as looking at existing trails where the interpretive programs are still being developed, there are stories we need to tell about the underrepresented people in our country and our history that aren't being told. And of course, our society is learning about that right now. And then of course, recreation. I went out on the Appalachian Trail in Maryland about 6 weeks ago with a friend of mine. We hiked, it was in August actually, we hiked 8 miles. We saw about 300 people in that hike on a Saturday, but yet it was drizzling. Half those people at least were non-Caucasian, and many of them had families. And by the way, not all of them are likely to hike a long hike, but they are there for different reasons, and we need to emphasize this. We need to emphasize this as we sell this trail system. It's about, in fact, we overdo the story of the long distance hiker, as genuine and as inspirational as it is, but we need to think about the value of this trail to people with families, to people that want to exercise, people that are overweight. I mean, people that want to get more healthy. And then the educational experiences. ATC has a great program called Trails to Every Classroom, connecting local classrooms with local segments of the AT. And then the volunteering and the rising awareness of the public health value of being able to use these trails. And you know, there's so many things, almost everything we can say about COVID-19 is bad and negative. A good thing is that it has exposed the value of our national parks, our state parks, and our national trails, because trails of all types use is skyrocketed this year because of the COVID situation. So it's a moment of opportunity. That brings us up to where we are and where we left off the story with the Great American Outdoors Act about 45 minutes ago. We clearly have historic opportunities, not just for protecting these trails, but also for improving the ability of our federal partners coupled with our nonprofit organizations to sustainably manage these trails, to make these trails better and more accessible for increased trail use. Now, the timing has been good from the PNTS perspective because we've transitioned our leadership to Valerie Roop, and also we've transitioned our location to Washington, D.C., or our national headquarters. I think we have a great network of 32 trail organizations. I think we need to build our partnerships and our collaborative efforts. Joel Dunn talked about how important it is earlier today to work with other partnerships effectively. And just think for a while about how do we create this momentum for creating a healthy and a just future for public lands, and particularly for national trails. So here's some goals. These are some initial goals for this National Trails campaign. We are in a situation where about 20,000 miles of our national trail system is not protected in any way, shape, or form, whether that be historic sites or places or where events in history occurred, or segments of our national scenic trails. We have in many cases for many trails, we have identified a next round of priorities, but we need a lot more funding to do what we want to do. The other part of that is, well, we've got to build a greater amount of resources. Not just money from the federal government or state agencies, but also, and we need money from a number of different sources, including funding to build the capacity of our organization, PNTS, and its individual trail organizations. We need more training, and we really have a lot to do in front of us. But now is a great time to be just to be where we are in putting together this National Trails campaign. So what we came up with as a result of our deliberations and discussions with our National Trails team was an action plan. And it really had 4 pieces to it. First of all, increased federal funding, and that's directed primarily, though not exclusively, at the Land and Water Conservation Fund. More sustainable management of national trails by lead agencies and their nonprofit partners. I was really struck when I interviewed about 20 of the national trail nonprofit organizations and a number of the federal agency administrators. I was really struck by how small the budgets were for some of our trail organizations, how little public federal funding they were getting, even though Congress intended the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and the BLM to kind of co-manage these and to fund them adequately, and yet they haven't been able to do that in most cases. So those are 2: more federal money, more money for from state and local governments. I mean, not just money, but more support for resource protection. And then I really want to underscore this: a national campaign launched to promote national trails as a special feature of the American experience. Now, we talked a lot about that in our team, And there's no question that the 50th anniversary in 2018 of the National Trail System Act was a great and significant effort to market and to direct attention to our national trails. We've got to build on that. We've got to do something really, really pretty spectacular when we actually launch this national campaign in a public way, as I hope we are able to do next year. Because I think the first step to getting to all the rest of the steps that I've just gone over is that this needs to be recognized by this country and around the world as the preeminent, the largest, the most ambitious, the most diverse national trail system in the world. And if we get to that point, I think you're going to see a lot more public support and a lot more funding for what we do. So our next steps. I do think this small organization with a big agenda and its member organizations is well positioned to move ahead with a National Trails Action Plan. And that would involve increasing the PNTS staff capacity, as well as the same for a number of our national trail organizations. So, developing a need statement within the trails community that will support this action plan. Developing the list of early land acquisition and trail management projects. By early there, I mean those that are, early on our next list, because we have done a lot of trail protection already. Define specific goals and objectives, and outline an implementation plan, a timeline, a budget, etc. There's a lot there. This was fully intended to be a multi-year effort. I should have mentioned earlier, when we decided to put this action plan together, we did not anticipate a Great American Outdoors Act. So you talk about great timing, I think we have it. And there's in one sentence, there's a summary of where we want to go to in the future. So thank you for listening to that overview of what may be a 5-year or greater effort, which I covered in about 19 minutes. Now, before we go into the questions, I want to frame the question and answer and make it be a little bit more of a discussion, although I'll be glad to try to answer any question that you have. But I really want to focus on, I'd like you to think about a few things. First of all, of course, if you want to come up with some really significant, just examples, quick examples of additional sites and segments protected, sure. But let's not go too far with that, because that's what we have to do, moving forward. I would be interested in any comments on how effective you think the current federal and nonprofit partnerships are. Because to be honest, there are, in some of my discussions, I found that there was some concern about, for example, National Park Service leadership in certain, and I don't mean by individuals, I mean a feeling that this wasn't a high enough priority for the National Park Service. And I don't think it has been, but I think we can change that. Well, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that line. How do we promote the value of America's national trails through branding, marketing, and social and traditional media? It's a big, big topic, I realize. And what opportunities exist through the Great American Outdoors Act? One final comment before we have the questions. We are talking today in the middle of a presidential election. We are talking in a politically charged environment. And I point that out not because I'm not going to, make any partisan comments. But what I do want to say is that we may touch on some issues we have with the current Department of Interior around the Great American Outdoors Act. That's not intended to be a criticism of this administration, but we are going to need to be ready to move forward with whatever administration we have. And if we have a new administration, there's a great opportunity to get on their high priority. Again, it will be one of their high priorities for their transition. So let me stop there. I think Andrea Kretschmark is going to tee up some questions for us.
Thanks, Ron. I think we have a few to start with. Don Owen asks, how does permanent full funding for stateside LWCF fit into this campaign?
Good question. As most of you know, the Land and Water Conservation Fund has a federal and a state component. And in the GAOA bill, they specifically designated 40% for the national side of the LWCF, 40% for the state share, and then 20% for other projects, particularly outdoor recreation access. The state side of LWCF is critical to our success. In some states, for some trails, the state share of LWCF has been a funding source. And it is one of the things we've talked about within our National Trails Campaign team is how do we get a higher degree of access to more money from state LWCF for trails like the North Country Trail. Let's go through 8 states. And, you know, we need more than just federal money. And in the case of state land acquisition for trails, that often involves expanding existing state parks or state forests or state recreation areas. So the states are getting a twofer. They're getting their areas of conservation and outdoor recreation, you know, protection expanded, and they're able to protect segments of the national trails.
Great, thank you. John Hofnagel asks, how do you scale down from the national scope to individual projects by local trail groups? How do you listen to the priorities of the grassroots groups to determine project selection bottom up rather than top down?
Yeah, another good question. Well, for the partnership, it's clearly bottoms up. The partnership is there to represent 30 trails and 32 trail organizations. And so I think the partnership has constantly looked under Gary Werner's leadership for which trails need money for what. So I'll focus now on land acquisition, site protection. So I think we've had about 19 of the 30 trails have received some funding from the Land and Water Fund. What I would say is that, and this is a challenge for us, if you to sort of dumb it down a little, about 5-6 trails have gotten the bulk of that money. The Triple Crown of the AT, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail has probably had the most money from federal funding, along with the Ice Age Trail. And on the National Historic Trail side, I know the Lewis and Clark Trail has gotten fairly steady funding, and then there's been specific projects for the Alakalaikai and others. But I think one thing that question suggests that I would say is important is we need to come to a point where we are able to present funding projects for Land and Water Fund or State Share Fund or for private conservation sorts from all of these trails, because they're all in different times in history. Some are newer than others. Some are, the AT is pretty much, the corridor is permanently protected. Other trails just only had a comprehensive plan in recent years.
Great, thank you. Good question from Margaret Gorski. If we want to market the whole system, who is the target audience we are trying to convince of the value of the whole system and why?
I think there are a number of target audiences. The first thing I would say in answer to that question is our targeted audience is the nation as a whole. It's all 50 states. In particularly, it's every congressional district that these trails go through. It is, I will just as a side comment, one of the reasons this is such a great opportunity for us is these trails have such strong bipartisan support. And when I interviewed the nonprofit partners, I heard this over and over again. I said, who in your congressional delegation is leading the show, leading the effort for you. And they would say, so and so and so and so. And it was always Republicans and Democrats, no matter what state. I think other targets for us are specific communities that are near trails. You look at Madison, Wisconsin, and how focused they are on the Ice Age Trail. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy created, has 50 plus trail communities. You talk about people at the grassroots that can help you get funding. That's a good example of how it works. I think I think for, let's look at the Washington Rochambeau and the Over Mountain Victory Trail and the Star Spangled Banner Trail. Okay, those trails are involved with the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. We're going to have a 200th anniversary of the Revolutionary War and the end of the Revolutionary War in not too long. And that's another great opportunity. There's so many different target audiences. I think the trick politically is to come up with the right people and the right advocates at the right place with the right people we're trying to convince.
Great, thank you. Amanda Wheelock has, I think I have a two-part question here. I agree that national trails would benefit from being more recognizable brand like national parks. That said, with current management issues on popular national trails like the AT and the PCT already under a lot of strain from overcrowding, underfunding, how would bringing more attention to the national trail system impact those trails? And also Steve Elkington wrote in that a publicity campaign, if successful, could lead to many more proposed trails in the system. And again, when we're in a system that is underfunded, how would PNTS react to that?
If I were in a presidential debate, I would duck the questions and just say something else. Not because I want to duck the questions. There's so many pieces to that. But let me try to drill it down into at least a couple of them because they are key questions. There's an ongoing debate within the trail community about the issue of overcrowding. And we certainly face it on the AT, but it's, the Pacific Crest Trail's catching up as far as popularity, people's awareness. And then, the Ice Age Trail had they had a recent study at University of Wisconsin, over 2 million different annual visitors every year. I think the answer to that is we need to embrace the fact and recognize the fact that these trails are going to become more popular, that is a good thing for promoting our national trails and demanding that our decision makers and our representatives in Congress and in state legislatures and governors give us more support because they're more highly valued, because more people want to be part of the national trail experience. So now, coupled with that, we're going to have to do we have to become much more effective and have greater resources to manage these trails because you're going to have more trail erosion, more trail damage, more people, more issues with law enforcement. There's a lot of things, but at the end of the day, where would you rather be? Would you rather have a national trail system that's extremely popular, very well known, people talking about it, major media exposure, which leads to more people wanting to hike on the trail? That's what happened in the last decade with the movie Wild on the Pacific Crest Trail and A Walk in the Woods on the Appalachian Trail. Both of us had number of hikers shoot up over the next several years. And I think it's a good thing, but there's a lot of management techniques. There are places on these trails already, and there are places in our national parks are very popular. And there are places where you can't just go there and expect that you're going to be able to do whatever you want to do. I was fortunate enough to be friends with Ansel Adams before he died in 1982. And one of the things he would say is, because as many of you know, he took many photos of Yosemite and he had a gallery in Yosemite Valley. He said, he said, national parks are not like the opera. With the opera, you may be able to get tickets that day. You shouldn't be able to drive up to Yosemite Valley in July on a whim because there's too many people going up in one day. We will have to manage these trails. They're on for the Appalachian Trail now. Mount Katahdin, which is in Baxter State Park, northern terminus, huge numbers of people climb Katahdin every year. There's now a cap. There's now a daily cap on how many people can go up the mountain. We haven't reached it yet. Maybe we will someday. So, but I think it's still, we want popularity for our trails, and we want people of all types to be able to use them and of all trail abilities.
Great. And Donna brings a comment and question about what opportunities are there to collaborate in promoting the forgotten component of the national trail system, national recreation trails, and that maybe in helping promote use of system, we were including those.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the partnership has not paid a lot of attention to national recreation trails. I think there's a couple of answers to that. First of all, we have many proposals for new national historic or scenic trails, especially historic trails. And not all of them qualify, and we're not going to be able to even bring all those that could conceivably qualify into the national trail system. I think some of those are excellent candidates to be considered as for national recreation trails. I think the second thing we can do is that in our marketing and our branding and our public discussions about national trails, we can certainly talk about national recreation trails as one additional opportunity area. Maybe that's part of the answer to if and when many of these trails become really popular. We can say, if you may not want on a summer Sunday ideal weather to go to your local national trail, historic trail or scenic trail. You may want to go to a national recreation trail, which is there more for recreation, and the management is assuming a large number of users. So there's a few ways that we can, I think, connect with the national recreation trail system, and we certainly can lobby together for funding for trails. The U.S. Forest Service announced in March, I believe, a 10-year program for national forest trails, a really very impressive initiative. And I think that for them, that's all the trails they manage. And some of those are national recreation trails. And so we will be advocating strongly for the U.S. Forest Service to get more money for their trail program, and that'll include recreation trails.
Great, thank you. And let's jump back to LWCF for a minute. And Kathy had a great question about under the Obama administration, we included a national trails LWCF proposal called a collaborative landscape planning, which was under the Obama administration. Can we get back to that, where numerous trail LWCF projects are bundled together each year, underscoring the national scope of the national trail system?
Great question. I think that we're going to create a working group within the partnership that Valerie Roop will talk about at the end of this presentation. But that's going to be one of the strategies they need to consider. Yes, we have options, and we've talked about a few of them. One of them is to revive the whole collaborative landscape, concept, and reinstitute for national trails. To be quite honest, that would be a possibility if we wind up with a Biden-Harris administration. I do not see the Trump-Pence administration. They tend not to pick anything that has Obama's name on it. So that wouldn't work, but that's not going to stop you. That's one option. Another option is what I might call the AT approach. in 1978, 10 years after the National Trail System Act, and because there was very little progress made in that first decade toward protecting the AT, especially by the National Park Service, there was special legislation that was passed by Congress that directed the Park Service in particular to lead an effort to protect the entire trail. I could see specific legislation for national trails, maybe individual trails, but more likely some kind of an omnibus kind of bill that would look at the national trail system and be very specific in recognizing it as a top level candidate for land and water conservation fund money. And that's, I mean, there are a variety of legislative and federal and administrative approaches we could use. I also want to go back to a comment that was made in in the previous session before this one, which was an answer to a question I asked, which is, I asked about the fact that we are hearing that the current administration, not the whole administration, let's say the Department of Interior, Secretary Bernhardt, are doing what they can to move money that's directed to the Land and Water Conservation Fund over to deferred maintenance, which I think we would strongly object to. And I do believe, based on what I've heard, which is being reinforced in the last several days, there is no question that that is under serious review. They have asked for what they call a solicitor's opinion, which means a lawyer's opinion, asking how much money could they move away from the Land and Water Fund and into this maintenance account. And they have not gotten the answer they want yet, but they are continuing to pursue that to get a solicitor's opinion that will fit that. And the other thing that we're hearing from multiple people who are directly involved at the Department of Interior and the Park Service with the Land and Water Fund is they're not asking the people that supervise national trails or national trail land acquisition for the Park Service. They're not asking them for any data on national trail acquisition projects that they can forward to Congress. They have to forward to Congress by in a couple of weeks, a list to be considered for funding. And as of 2 days ago, I was told there is no list that's being put together by the Department of Interior for LWCF.
So I have a question. Since I'm monitoring the questions, I'm inserting my own here. What is, you talked about the importance of our federal partners in this. I wonder, we have discussed the potential erosion of this incredible shared management that we have between both federal and nonprofits in the National Trail System. What, if any, feedback have we received on these priorities and these strategies from our federal partners? We know that they're going to have to be incredibly involved and that it's going to have to be both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. And so, what, if anything, are we hearing about how lofty our goals look, or, where they think we should focus?
Yeah, it's a big question, a good one. I would just say that historically thus far, especially with the National Park Service, we have not had the level of support that we need to advance these agendas for protecting national trails and having sustainable funding for management. Now, I say that not to be critical, but I'm actually enthusiastic and optimistic that that's going to change, and that is changing. First of all, we've had really strong national trail coordinators, and we now have 3 new people, all who've been selected in the last 2 months. And Karen Farley yesterday, a woman I worked with extensively when she was Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the Appalachian Trail, for the Appalachian Trail Park Office. Brenda's, I can't pronounce her last name, Brenda, yet, but I'll get it soon. And John Cannella for the National Park Service, Brenda for the National U.S. Forest Service. They're going to be part of our team, and I think they're very enthusiastic about the scope of what we're talking about. I think that especially if we have a new administration, because we're going to have new people in key places. But even if we don't, I think we can go to the director of the Park Service, and particularly because the Park Service is the lead agency manager for 23 of the 30 national trails. And I think we can work with the Park Service leadership, with the Park Service acquisition people, with their regional offices, and with the park administrators to advance this agenda. I think we've got a better case. I think we've got more political support. I think they see that we had a significant role, along with many other organizations and interests, in passing Great American Outdoors. I think that in itself, I think, gives us greater respect and credibility. So I think, but you know, again, we're a relatively small organization, and I don't mean just PNTS. I mean our network of organizations. Some only have one person that's working, you know, full time on this. I mean, we're going to have to come up with a plan, and we are looking at some opportunities for fundraising to increase our resources to make all this happen. And Andrea, I will say, Andrea, I know, because you and I have talked specifically about kind of how do we get the Park Service from bottom to top more, you know, kind of more behind us, strongly behind us. And I started working with the National Park Service as a congressional investigator in the late 1970s. And I think I know a little bit about the psyche of that organization and how you get them. They're an organization that responds well to public pressure or public support, depending on how you want to identify it. I think there are going to be ways to bring them to do what they should do, which is recognize all of the national trails the Park Service supervises as units of the national park system.
Unit status, wonderful, thank you. And Amanda asked if you can share who was involved in this team to draft this set. And I know you and Valerie are about to talk about, you know, the next step.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully I'll remember them all. We had Kevin Thusius from the Ice Age Trail. We had Margaret Gorski, Kathy DeCoster, Destry Jarvis, who is a longtime National Trails advocate, and I'm missing one person.
Me.
Somebody, pardon me. I'm missing you. That's
I was.
right. No, I was doing the others first because I remembered you, and then I forgot you. But then, so much for my short-term memory. It was really, I thought, a really great experience. We had National Scenic, National Historic Trail representatives. We had people like Kathy and Destry, who have so much experience in advocacy and policy and so on. Gary Werner was very involved in his role as our former executive director and leader. And we worked very closely with a number of trails. We worked closely with Don Owen and the TPL team were putting together what's now called the connectivity analysis. So I think there's a lot of thought that went into, you know, this National Trails campaign. And then of course we wind up, what do you know, with a pot of gold out there with the Great American Outdoors Act.
Great. Well, that looks like all of the questions that have come in through chat.
Okay.
Are any more that you guys want to type in?
Give them another couple minutes and then we'll let Valerie Roop talk a little bit about the next steps with a working group.
Great.
Oh, and let me emphasize something again, which I didn't say enough about, and that is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Obviously, that's been a major theme, as it should be, for this entire workshop. And it is, we have a working group within the PNTS that is looking at new national trail proposals, and we have come up with some specific ideas about new national trail proposals, especially those that will expand the diversity and the inclusion level for our national trail system. And that's not just about that's not just about new trails, that's about our existing trails as well. And we've had some interesting stories, as we listened to presentations on the Over Mountain Victory Trail and the role of African-American people in the history of that trail. There's a proposal for a Ulysses Grant historic trail. Well, if that were to become a National Historic Trail, it would have to include the role of freed slaves during the Civil War who joined the Union's efforts and played a big part in ending the war through winning battles in the South. And it was heroic what those people did coming out of being enslaved. And so there's so much richness of the American, diverse American experience that we need to inject into this system. I think that Valerie, if you're ready, I think it would, why don't you inform us about how we're going to move forward with the National Trails campaign, and particularly the Great American Outdoors piece of it.
Okay. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the input and feedback that all of you participating in this session have shared on the concept that Ron has put forward, and for all the work that Ron and the rest of the task force put into this action plan. The concept of this action plan was drafted before I began with the partnership. And as you noted in the many thoughtful questions you posed, I recognize that a campaign of this magnitude will be a heavy lift, and it will require the input, buy-in, and brain power of many people. Your questions and comments are very valuable and will really help us to be very valuable to us as we strengthen our foundation as an organization to position us to begin to shape an approach to this action plan. Ron presented us with a grand vision as well as a timely opportunity during the presentation, specifically the recent passage of the Great American Outdoors Act. I recognize the need for the partnership to develop a strategy for its work in relation to the Great American Outdoors Act funding. So as an immediate next step, I'm proposing to create a working group for the Great American Outdoors Act for the partnership's role in that will help outline a strategy that will guide our work in this arena over the next several months. There will be opportunities to share your thoughts and receive information about the strategy as it develops. However, I welcome your thoughts regularly and early. And I also encourage you to contact me to share any ideas, ask questions, or to get involved with this. As all the questions that you're posing in this show, you're such a bank of knowledge, and I really, really hope that you'll get involved with us with this and, work with us moving forward so we can really make this something that benefits all of us. And, as a short-term strategy, GAOA is just such a vital opportunity for us to take a hold of that, I'm really looking forward to this working group coming together to advance those matters. So, as we're here, if anyone has questions right now, I'm happy to answer what we can. This is just in its formation. We'll be starting to look to recruit coming up, and Ron has graciously offered to chair the group with us. So, we'll have some good leadership, but I welcome any comments or thoughts right now, or you can always email me moving ahead so this will be an ongoing and open conversation.
And Valerie, let me add one thing, because I saw it, Nicole Wooten asked this question about how, what's the timetable, so to speak, for this campaign. And what you just said indicates the first phase of that campaign, which is from now till the end of March, roughly 5 months. And that's the first phase because, we may have a new administration. If we do, then there's a whole piece of that campaign plan that's directed at getting us front and center with the next administration at the political level, as well as in the Park Service, Forest Service, BLM, et cetera. So that, second reason that 5 months is the timetable is that's the timetable in which we'll see the FY21 funding from LWCF and for deferred maintenance, and we will see the FY22 budget request in that time frame. So that 5 month period is a critical, I think, first phase.
Yep. And this is, this is our low hanging fruit immediate action items, as we noted in all the questions you put forward. As we endeavor on anything larger, we're going to need all of your input and strength with this, and the buy-in will be critical. So, this is immediate actions, and I even saw in some of the questions, for instance, some that Kathy posed and so on around collaborative landscape planning and so on. Those past examples, these are all things that this working group can consider in terms of what our next steps moving forward as a partnership will be. So again, we're a partnership, all of us together. So, your input is critical.
I'd like to thank everybody for the being participants this afternoon, very active participants at that. We've had a number of great questions out there. And so I know I'm pleased with the workshop to date, and especially the participation. But I want to thank all the presenters.